Hey there, grade 5. This is our next social studies lesson for today, and today we're looking at more Portuguese exploration and finding India. Or at least finding the Indian Ocean. We're not going to find India until the next lesson, really, but this is getting there. So, John II of Portugal. So, he is, it's been a bit of time has passed since Henry the Navigator, about kind of one king in between. And so this is the son of like a brother of John the Navigator. So he's John II of Portugal. He was crowned king in 1481, and I guess just to go back a step, since the time of Henry the Navigator, when Henry the Navigator died, exploration kind of died down a little bit. It was basically given to some private people, and it was happening, but nothing amazing was accomplished. It was just mostly just trading with the places that were known and a bit of exploration here and there. But John II, he decided that he wanted to up the exploration and focus in on the expansion of Portuguese power. So in the year 1882, one of the first major things he does is he establishes a major fortress at the town of Lima on the Gold Coast. So this site had actually been used for quite some time as a trading post. So there was an African village there, and there had been a private merchant called Fernando Gomez. He was kind of semi-private, so the government gave him a bit of help, and he returned money back to them. And he was also commissioned. He had to explore a little bit every year. He actually did more than he was asked to, but still, no one was really focused in on exploring right now. So a few rivers were mapped out, and a few coastline was learned about, but it didn't go too far. There was a war, which we'll get to in a second, and the outcome of that war was that the Portuguese decided they probably needed to put a fortress here. So this is one of the first things that John II does when he becomes king. He was a prince during the war. So the reason is that now the Spanish were they were in a war with the Castilians that became Spain soon. The Castilians had been threatening the Portuguese trade, and that was a large part of what they were doing during this war. And so this being one of the most important trade hubs for Portugal, they decided they'd put a big fortress here. Now, there's obviously been bigger fortresses since, but this is quite big for the time. And it is the first fortress ever established south of the Sahara by the Europeans. And so it's quite a big deal. And they actually brought all the material that was needed to build it, from the big stones to the shingles on the roof, were all brought and it was designed in Europe and brought and built over here with all the materials. And it took a bunch of boats, like these caravels, and you can kind of see this line here showing where it's a pretty big journey to bring all this stuff there, especially at that time via boat. It was a pretty important thing, and now this fortress was set up there. Now, the fortress was actually very useful to the Portuguese, and they actually didn't necessarily buy the land. They kind of told the leader, the local king, the African king there, or chieftain, they gave him some gifts, and they kind of threatened him and said, if you don't let us build this fortress, there'll be trouble. And obviously when the Portuguese have big cannons on their ships, you don't really want to have trouble with them. So he let them build the fortress. And this fortress became very, very useful because it first off protected the Portuguese trade and from harassment. And second, it also allowed the Portuguese to control the whole area, because from there they had a base that they could make sure that no one else could really trade in the area other than the Portuguese. And so they would do this either by attacking maybe a tribe that decided to trade with the Spanish or something. They would kind of attack the tribe just to make sure everyone was on the same page, that only the Portuguese were trading here. This was a big port, and it became very, very important as the years went on as one of the central hubs in this area of Africa. Yeah, so that, and it's still today. This picture is actually a modern picture. It's still there today, and it was conquered by the Dutch, and then it was conquered by the British. So it's had a long history of changing hands, but it was originally built by the Portuguese. And part of the reason it was built right here was because the Spanish, during this Castilian War of succession, which I was just talking about, happened nearby. So there was this war was happening. So it was a war. When you see a war, ever says like the Castilian succession, it's normally a war about who's going to be the next king. And so there's a bit of a fight there, a lot of story that we don't need to get into for our exploration thing, but the Portuguese were involved. And so yeah, the Portuguese were fighting with the Castilians. So Portugal tried to invade by land, but the Castilians beat the Portuguese back, and Portugal basically lost on land. But the Castilians on their side, they wanted to take part of the Portuguese money from the trade, and they wanted to actually conquer a lot of the territories. Now the Castilians had a lot of ships. They actually had 30 ships, and they attacked, or they kind of were harassing the Portuguese colonies or merchants and taking some of the gold. And those 30 ships actually stopped right outside of this area here. So the fortress wasn't there yet, and they were actually docked right there. Now the Portuguese, have more effect, the Portuguese came with 11 ships and actually surprised the Castilians and wiped out the whole Spanish kind of fleet there. And that left, the Spanish kind of had lost on sea while they had won on land. And so in the end, there was a peace treaty called the Treaty of Alcacovas. So I don't know how to speak Portuguese, but yeah, there you go. So anyways, this is a pretty big deal for Portugal. So this little paper here, that with the very squiggly liney looking stuff, was pretty good for Portugal because it told Portugal that they basically, between at least Spain and Castile becomes Spain. So sorry I say that, but it does become Spain later. So Portugal basically gets all their colonies are said to be Portuguese, and they get undeniable rights to them. Also, Portugal got a lot of money. So Castile paid a lot of money to Portugal. And Portugal also gained the right to all land south of the Canary Islands. So that was basically, they were given temporary uncontested hegemony in the Atlantic. So later this gets contested. So just like a lot of treaties, they establish some rules for a while, and then someone doesn't like the rules and just breaks them. Castile does eventually get involved again in the trade, because by this time a lot of money is coming back and forth. So yeah, this is pretty important for Portugal, though. For a while they get to continue expanding without any other competition, which is pretty good. So this is the big guy who discovered that you can cross around Africa. So remember, before 2 lessons ago we talked about how part of the reason for exploration was to try and get to the Indian Ocean without having to go through the Middle East, through the Muslims, and through, because the reason why that was a problem is there's so many middlemen that by the time you get in France, you get some spice from India, you're paying for the merchant in India, you're paying for the merchant in the Middle East, and you're also paying for the Venetians who would be trading too. So you're paying like 3 times or maybe 6 times the price of what it cost originally. So the Portuguese wanted to just pay for the thing bare bones. So part of the reason was they're trying to find a way around Africa. And so now Portugal enters into the Indian Ocean. So and soon they get right up to India. It was this man here called Bartolomeu Diaz, and you can see him there in the stone kind of statue of him. That's part of the South African mission to England, I think. So it's a big building from like an embassy in England. And you can see that little cross that he's kind of leaning on there. He actually established that, and you can see it says 1488 in the bottom corner there. Portuguese actually did this quite often. When they got to a point of new discovery, they would leave a little stone cross, and that little symbol just before the base of the cross is the Portuguese like royal crest. So yeah, they would put these little like symbols saying we were here, just like kind of like the Americans put a flag on the moon, right? Just to say, hey, we were here. So yeah, Bartholomew, he was commissioned to go and explore more. And so they found some new discoveries, some new islands in the Congo River. And then Bartholomew sails around the Cape of Good Hope. First, he called it the Cape of the Stormy Cape, or the Cape of Storms. And I'll get to that in a second. But yeah, the king wanted to call it the Cape of Good Hope because now they were finally hopeful that they could actually reach India. They hadn't reached it there yet, but now that they've come around and they'd mapped that it had turned around, they're thinking they're going to be able to come up the other side, and they are able to come up the other side in the end. So yeah, that's very, very interesting. And anyway, so he comes around, and this is his first journey, and then he turns around pretty quickly because they didn't have too many supplies, and so they wanted to get back and tell the news. And they'd be gone for quite a while. So there was only a few ships that went. But yeah, so he's the first European explorer to get to the Indian Ocean by circumnavigating Africa, so going around Africa. So that's a big accomplishment. And this will lead into a huge new era where Portugal, for a long, long time, and probably not next lesson, but the lesson after, we'll learn about how Portugal kind of took control of almost the entire Indian Ocean and became the dominant power in India. And this is all, we have to remember that Portugal is still, at this time, one of the poorest and weakest nations in Europe. So it is pretty interesting, right? They're doing really well for what they have. But yeah, so Diaz gets back, and he goes back to Europe, and then they send him again on another adventure. I think he goes on a few more adventures, but one of his adventures, he actually dies down at the Cape because of a storm. And it's funny because he did call it the Cape of Stormy Seas. So it was pretty, they are really stormy seas because the Indian Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean are of different temperatures. And when they meet, they create quite big winds and storms. So yeah, he died there. And then, probably next time we talk about Portugal, we'll talk about Vasco da Gama, and we'll go more into detail, but you can see here that he also goes around Africa, and he goes, along the coast of Africa, and then eventually sails over to India. And there's a lot of cool things that happen there, like big battles and big stuff. But yeah, so that's all for this time for our social science. Hope you enjoyed, and we'll get to learn more next time. Bye-bye.
It was the year 1509 in the Arabian Sea in the port of Dio, India. The Mamelukes, an Arab force, had gathered against the Portuguese who had just found their way into the Indian Sea and were trying to cut off their attempts to gain control over the dominance of the spice trade. But the Portuguese would have none of it. Their small fleet of caravels and other ships faced down a much larger fleet of Muslim and Indian forces that were trying to stop the Portuguese from gaining control. What was at stake was the very power of the Muslims in the region and the trade itself. The outcome of this war would be the dominance of trade for the next 100, 200, 300, almost several hundred years actually. And it was won by cannon fire.
you see clouds. These are galleys. Sorry, changed tone, but that's how they kind of work, right? They got oars, they've got a bit of sails, and they have some cannons on the front. They're not as effective as the ships that the Portuguese would have used, which had big cannons on the sides. But get some few more epic shots here.